Her baby was stolen from a hospital crib in the middle of the night. No trace, no suspects, just silence. Long and cruel. 28 years later, the mother, still haunted, uploads a grainy lullaby video she once sang in the delivery room. Her voice trembling, cracked open with grief. It sits untouched for a decade. Then one day, a comment appears beneath it. Why does this song feel like home? That's how the truth came back. Welcome back, and thank you for listening. I'm just a small storyteller. So if this touched you, please hit that subscribe button for more heartwarming stories like this. Let me know in the comments where and what time you're listening from. I read them all. Now let's hear the story. The room was quiet in the way attics are quiet. Dust thick in the corners, air softened by old memories and insulation. Maris Halloway stood in the doorway, her hand resting on the frame like she was steadying herself against time. The light from the hallway behind her cut a thin, golden slice across the room's dusky interior, catching in the strands of a mobile that hadn't moved in 28 years. It still hung above the crib, pale wooden stars, turning slowly in the still air long after any child had watched them. She hadn't changed anything. The same pink wallpaper curled slightly at the edges, bearing faint outlines where sunlight had faded the spaces between tiny clouds and rabbits. A shelf of stuffed animals sagged under the weight of time, for stiffened glass eyes clouded as if they too were tired of waiting. The crib white-painted pine sat center beneath the window like a monument, a hand-knitted blanket folded over the side. Her mother had made it. Lily had never used it. Maris crossed the room slowly, the floorboards creaking only once. She reached down and brushed a finger along the edge of the crib, then paused, staring down into the empty space that had once held the future. Her chest ached the way it did every year around April. The ache wasn't sharp anymore. It was a dull, lingering hum, like a song with no lyrics always playing in the distance. She sat on the edge of the daybed, tucked beside the bookshelf, and picked up a camcorder from a nightstand. It was an old model plastic, discolored at the edges. She plugged it into the wall, pressed the button. The small screen flickered to life with a blue haze before it sharpened into the past. The hospital room. Maris's younger self, cheeks still round hair, darker smiled down at the infant she held. The baby's face was red, squinting against the light, her little hand flailing with effort. Maris hummed softly, her voice barely audible over the low static of the tape. "Sleep now, Lily girl. Hush, little flame," she sang a lullaby made up on the spot. She hadn't remembered the melody until she heard it played back. Now it lived in her throat like breath. She watched it 3 times. When the tape ended, she sat still, the room behind her, deepening into night. Only the camcorder's dim light lit her face, now catching in the lines time had traced. She hadn't cried. Not yet. A faint chime echoed from the living room. She didn't move at first. Another chime. The notification bell from her old laptop. She finally stood, her knees stiff, and walked the hallway back toward the light of the kitchen, where her computer sat open beside a cold mug of tea. The screen blinked. New comment on your video. She hadn't posted in years. It was a single upload, nearly forgotten. The same lullaby from the tape, recorded shakily from the camcorder, posted with trembling hands a decade ago during one of her lonelier spirals. She clicked the notification. Starfall Luna. Why does this song feel like home? That was all. Maris read it twice, then again. Her hands were suddenly colder. She hovered over the username. No photo, no bio. One video, liked an amateur music cover of a Sarah McLachlan song. She didn't respond. She didn't know how. Instead, she leaned back in a chair and closed her eyes. But the words pulsed behind her eyelids. Why does this song feel like home? The question wasn't poetic. It didn't seem like a metaphor. It read like someone asking something they didn't understand about themselves. Outside, wind moved gently through the maple trees lining her backyard. Their shadows brushed against the windows in restless patterns. She got up, walked to the sink, and stared out into the dark, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She touched her chest where her heart beat beneath her sweater, the same way she did when she was scared. Something was moving. She didn't know what, not yet. But something had stirred. Something had opened its eyes. The next morning, she printed the comment out. She taped it to her refrigerator beside a faded photo of her and Lily in the hospital, the only photo. The baby's eyes were closed, but her hand had gripped Maris's finger so tightly. She remembered that touch more clearly than her own name on some days. Later, she stood in the nursery again. The air had changed. She could feel it. She reached up to the mobile and flicked it gently. The stars turned, creaked slightly, and spun. Light caught on their edges, sending faint glimmers across the ceiling. For a brief second, it looked like the whole room was breathing. She sat down and began humming again. The lullaby came without thought, as if she'd been waiting for someone to ask her to sing. Across town, a girl who had never seen this room, never felt this blanket, sat watching that same video again, goosebumps trailing her skin like a forgotten whisper. Maris didn't know that. Not yet. But the universe had cracked open just slightly. And in the hairline fracture between two quiet lives, something had begun to bloom. Not loud, not fast, just enough to notice. A question, a flicker, a home feeling where there shouldn't be one. And far above them, both the stars continued turning. The room was lavender and dim, a soft lamplight glowing against posters curling at the corners, and strings of dried flowers hung like offerings from thumbtacks. Ivy Rose Mercer sat cross-legged on the floor, her acoustic guitar across her lap like a sleeping pet. The house around her was quiet. She waited for silence to stretch far enough that it felt like solitude, not just absence. Then she pressed record. She began to sing. Her voice was gentle, untrained, but clear like water running over stones. No theatrics, no VB to sound born from breath. The song was an old one her dad used to hum while washing dishes or driving the rain. She never knew the title. It wasn't even whole, just a fragment, a melody that always felt like it had lived inside her before she'd heard it. She stopped singing halfway through and exhaled, then leaned over and clicked off the camera. I don't know what that even is, she whispered to herself. Her fingers played the last few notes again, this time slower. The chords weren't hers. They had arrived in her hands one day, like her body had been waiting to remember them. She closed the laptop and set aside. A soft groan from the floorboards made her look up. Just the house. She stared at the mirror hanging above her dresser, framed in driftwood and dotted with tiny shells, from a beach she couldn't remember visiting. Her own reflection looked unfamiliar in that moment. Not monstrous, not strange, just borrowed, like someone had gently painted her face over someone else's. She stood and walked over, getting close enough to fog the glass with a breath. Hazel eyes, pale, freckled skin, a slight shadow beneath her cheekbones. She tilted her head, testing the curve of her expression. "Who are you?" she said aloud. The question came too easily. Later, she lay on her bed. knees curled toward her chest. The room bathed in blue from the computer screen. Her browser was open to YouTube. She'd been following a trail of lullabies, trying to find the source of that melody fragment. Something had pulled her to it, like falling into a half-dream. She searched for hours, drifting through grainy videos, most of them blurry bedtime songs, young mothers singing into the void. One thumbnail caught her. A woman older, tear-streaked, singing softly in a small room. The sound quality was terrible. Ivy clicked it anyway. The lullaby was slow and haunting, off-key, but raw. Something in it snagged inside her chest like a forgotten stitch being tugged. Her eyes, well before she knew why. Her hand moved fingers, hovering over the comment box. She hadn't planned to write anything, but her thoughts came out unedited, like breath after a held silence. Why does this song feel like home? She stared at the sentence. Then she hit enter. The moment the comment posted, something in her shifted. Just a fraction, just enough to notice. The video ended. She watched it again. There was something about the woman's face. Not the features, those were older, distant, but the way her eyes softened when she hummed that final note. The way she looked slightly past the camera, as if someone had once been in that room with her. Ivy clicked on the account. Only one video posted. No playlist. No name. The upload date, 10 years ago. A ghost story told in ones and zeros. She looked up from the screen and around her room. The lavender walls, the guitar, the bookshelves filled with novels she'd pretended to love. All of it suddenly felt like a very good replica of a life, but not hers. A knock on the door startled her. Ivy, Daniel's voice, her father. You okay in there? She took a breath. Yeah, just writing. All right, lights out soon. Okay. His footsteps faded. She sat up, running her hands through her hair. The roots were a little darker than she remembered. She thought about dyeing it again, but couldn't move. She opened her private messages and stared at the inbox. Nothing new, but an old message from a stranger lingered unread, sent weeks ago, flagged by the system. Smedella Croy, I saw your comment on that lullaby video. I'm working on something related. Can I ask you a question? She hadn't responded. She clicked on his profile. Journalist Soft featured a face that seemed to belong more in bookstores than on news feeds. She still didn't respond. Instead, she opened her camera again. This time, she didn't sing. She just stared into the lens. Tell me if you've ever felt like you were wearing your own life like a borrowed coat, she whispered. Because I do. And I don't know what to do with that. She hit save, but not upload. The room was too quiet again. She lay back and turned toward the wall. On the shelf above her desk, a row of family photos leaned gently in tilted frames. Her as a child, missing teeth, smiling with Daniel and May, the only mother she'd ever known. Their arms around her shoulders like armor. But something inside her had started to peel away, like an old label submerged in water. She closed her eyes. The lullaby echoed. Sleep now, lily girl. Hush, little flame. She dreamed of water, of being cradled in a tide that felt like breath. A woman's voice hummed just beyond the edge of sleep. She couldn't see her face, but she knew the sound. It wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't remember owning. And in the dream, Ivy cried without knowing why. Morning came soft and gray. The mirror held her image again, but this time, it didn't feel like a stranger. It felt like someone on the verge of remembering. And in the still space before her phone buzzed, before emails, before anything real, it felt like the world was holding its breath with her waiting. Elena Rivera woke before the sun as always. The habit remained years after retirement like a muscle that never unlearned how to flinch. Her apartment was small, quiet lived in without being warm. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lavender dish soap. She shuffled in thick socks across the tile, her cardigan hanging loose over her thin shoulders, sleeves pushed to the elbows, where her wrists still bore the faint marks of watch straps worn for too many decades. The kettle hissed, but she didn't pour the water right away. Her eyes lingered on the calendar pinned to the refrigerator. April 16th. She ran a knuckle slowly down the date, tracing the red inked number as though it might smudge and disappear if she pressed hard enough. She had not forgotten. She never forgot. The kettle screamed softly. She silenced it. The mug trembled slightly in her hand as she poured chamomile not coffee. She hadn't touched caffeine since 2002. Her hands couldn't take it. The tremors had started before retirement. No one ever asked why. The computer on the table hummed awake as she sat. A habit again, checking the morning news, the weather, the obituary section. Sometimes she read the comments on human interest stories. She liked the quiet ache of strangers. Today, something pulled her to the search bar. She didn't know why. She typed lullaby hospital video missing child. It was too vague. She knew that, but her fingers kept moving. She hadn't searched for years. Not since she made herself promise to stop. A video thumbnail caught her. A woman in a dim nursery singing grainy, trembling footage. The room behind her was faded pink. Dust hung in the light like breath. Elena clicked. The song was old, uneven, clearly home-recorded. But the melody gripped her, not because she recognized the tune, but because of the voice that carried it, how it cracked mid-note, how it ashed without knowing who might hear it. And then she saw the face. Maris older, but unmistakable. Elena's throat tightened. Her mug trembled on the table, clinking against the ceramic plate it rested on. She reached for the screen, like she might touch the air around it. Maris Halloway, the mother. Elena didn't know the video existed. She had spent years avoiding any mention of the case. After the internal investigation closed, after the papers stopped calling, she packed away the articles, the letters, the silence, and placed them in a box in the back of her closet. She hadn't opened it in a decade. Her eyes flicked to the comment section, scanning lazily until one line stopped her. "Why does this song feel like home?" she whispered aloud. The words floated in the air like breath on cold glass. She clicked the username, Starfall Luna, a name chosen by someone who believed in quiet skies, or maybe had none of their own. There was no photo, no information, but that didn't matter. Something in her knew. She stood too fast. Her chair scraped back with a scream. She moved to the hall closet, pulling down the old box, its cardboard dry and flaking at the edges. Inside, time lay waiting. Files, photos, old staff reports. She opened the smallest folder. There a printout from the original investigation, the log from that night. Her signature scribbled over the final line like a seal she no longer recognized. She sat on the floor. The memories weren't all at once. They came like mist creeping under a door. First, the hallway, sterile humming, with overhead fluorescents. She had worked the 11:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. shift. It was supposed to be routine. She knew all the mothers by name. Lily was only 3 days old, quiet, healthy. Maris had just dozed off. She remembered the lullaby even then, soft, unfinished. And then the woman in the yellow coat. Elena remembered it now. Sudden and sharp. Not nurse. She hadn't recognized her face. No badge, no chart. She had walked out of the nursery at 3:12 a.m. for just a moment to respond to a buzz at the front desk. A misdirected call. Less than 60 seconds. When she returned, Lily's bassinet was empty. That silence that second had lasted for 28 years. She told them she didn't know. She told them the tapes had glitched. She told them she'd been alone on shift. She told them enough, but not everything. Because she'd seen Callie Holloway once in the parking lot weeks before the birth, arguing with someone in a gray sedan. Elena hadn't reported it. She didn't want to stir tension in an already tender family. And then after the abduction, she saw Callie again in the lobby. The same yellow coat. The pieces never sat right. The hospital had shut it down. No proof, no prints. No one wanted scandal. Elena was quietly moved to a different department, then to administrative leave, then back again, but never left her. And now, this girl, whoever she was, had written something that felt like a crack in the silence. She returned to the computer. Her hands hovered above the keyboard. She opened her email, typed erased, typed again to Grace Delroy. Subject, it's happening again. She paused. Grace had been there too. Pediatric unit. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, but if anyone would understand, she hit send. Then she opened a new window and typed in a comment again, over and over. Why does this song feel like home? She whispered it like a prayer, then louder, a question, a confession. She stood in the hallway outside her bedroom, staring at the closet mirror. Her reflection looked hollowed out. She hadn't cried in 15 years, but now her hand touched the mirror, and she wept without noise. From the other room, the lullaby kept playing over and over, like a wound that hummed. The truth had never left. It had just been waiting for a voice. The city didn't wake all at once. It stirred in soft layers, window blinds, lifting kettle whistles, distant traffic, humming through fog. Simon Delroy sat by the window of his cramped apartment, a pencil tapping rhythmically against the spine of his notebook. His laptop screen glowed with half-finished notes and open tabs. But his attention drifted toward the alley below, where early light pulled between brick buildings, like water in a bowl. He hadn't planned to follow this story. It had started as a background noise, a note in a thread of human interest leads for a piece on digital grief. Videos, comments, memories uploaded like ashes scattered across the cloud. But the comment had stopped him. Why does this song feel like home? It wasn't just poetic. It was unspoken memory. Something you only write when your bones remember something your mind does not. He traced it back to the original video. Lors, a lullaby, an older woman humming into a small handheld camera, and what looked like a nursery paused in time. The softness of her voice, the warble at the end of each verse. It lingered long after the video stopped. Simon had seen that face before, not in real life, but in archives. He returned to the digital folders, now each labeled in cryptic short Orthand cases he glanced at but never pursued. One called Hollow Years 94. He clicked Maris Holloway, infant daughter stolen from St. Vincent's Maternity Hospital. April 16th, 1994. No suspects, no leads. Case went cold. The child had never been found. He stared at the still image in the file. A young Maris, gaunt and shaking, clinging to a pink hat so small it looked like a doll's. Her eyes were bloodshot. She wasn't crying in the photo. She looked emptied. He clicked back to the video. It was her. The same jawline drawn now with time. The same eyes, only older and swollen with the kind of grief that never dissipates, only deepens. Simon had followed strange trails before, but this one, it felt like standing in the doorway of something sacred. The lullaby had maybe 300 views, barely a whisper in the noise of the internet, but the comment had started something. Beneath it, replies had begun to trickle in, most of them anonymous curious. But one reply stood out. A girl named Ivy Rose had responded with a sad face emoji in a single sentence. I don't know why I know it either. Simon clicked on her profile video's covers of folk songs, a few original pieces. One caught his eye immediately, a homemade recording of the same lullaby. He played it. Her voice was clearer, younger, but the cadence was almost identical. Muscle memory. He could hear it in the way she held the long notes, like they were tethered to something inside her. He pressed pause and leaned back, eyes wide. It wasn't coincidence. He pulled out his phone and scrolled until he found his mother's number. She picked up on the second ring. Simon Grace said, her voice textured with sleep and age. I need to ask you about the Holloway case, he said softly. The silence that followed lasted too long. You're not doing a story on that, she said, not a question. I think I found her. He said the baby. She's 28. She doesn't know. Grace's breath caught. Simon, I'm not guessing. I got a comment, a face, a song. He heard her sit down. The quiet shift of fabric against couch cushion. There was so much we weren't allowed to say, she murmured. We all knew something was wrong that night. You were on shift. No, she said, but I saw Elena the next morning. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. And Callie, the sister, she was in the lobby before security even arrived, just standing there. No explanation. No one ever connected it. Simon stared at the screen again. The still frame of Ivy paused mid-note. Her expression somewhere between sleep and grief. I need to reach her, he said. You need to be careful, Grace said. If you're right, this could ruin everything, or it could fix something, he replied. Grace didn't argue. She only said, Elena might talk to you now, but gently, Simon. She's been carrying that night like a body on her back. He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. After they hung up, he opened Ivy's YouTube profile and sent a message. Cautious, honest. Hi, Ivy. I saw your comment on that lullaby video. I'm working on something connected. Would you be willing to talk? Just one question. No response yet. He paced the room, tension coiling in his shoulders. The sky was shifting from slate to pearl outside. He watched the light touch the fire escape like a hand. The girl was out there somewhere, unknowingly standing on the fault line of her own life. He opened the lullaby video again and watched it from beginning to end. This time, he focused not on Maris, but the room behind her. The details, the mobile, the blanket, the soft pink glow. He paused at a frame near the end. The corner of the video caught the edge of a photograph on the wall, barely in view, but enough. He screenshot it, zoomed in. A hospital wristband, blurry but readable. L. Holloway. His chest tightened. He didn't know how to break the truth to someone who didn't even know there was a lie. He only knew it had started now, like pulling the first thread from a tapestry. Soon, it would all unravel, and all that would be left was the raw fabric of what had always been there, waiting. The walls were too beige. Neutral, the counselor had said. Neutral colors for fragile moments. But to Maris, the beige looked like still water, shallow, unmoving stale, with all the things left unsaid. She sat on the edge of the couch in the center of the room, her hands folded in her lap, like they belonged to someone else. A box of tissues perched untouched on the table beside her. A picture of water, 2 glasses. She hadn't had water. Her mouth was dry, but drinking felt too ordinary, too alive for this kind of waiting. Across the room, a second couch sat empty, its cushions neatly arranged. She stared at it, the way one might stare at a hospital bed. Something sacred would happen there, or something shattering. The door clicked. She stood without realizing. Footsteps, a hush of movement. Then she saw her. Ivy entered the room, as if crossing into a dream. Her shoulders slightly hunched like she hadn't decided whether to run or stay. A plain blue sweater hair in a loose braid. No makeup. She looked younger than she was, or maybe just smaller. They stared at each other. Ivy's eyes searched Maris's face the way you search a photograph for something familiar. Not recognition, more like resonance. Maris forgot to breathe. The counselor, someone Maris hadn't bothered to learn the name of, gestured gently toward the couch. "I'll be just outside," she said, before leaving them alone with the silence. Ivy sat her knees together, hands tucked between them, eyes darting to the pitch of water and then back to the floor. Mia sat too, but didn't lean back. She swallowed. "I didn't know what to wear," Marisa said quietly. Her voice was husky from disuse. "I thought maybe a dress, but it didn't feel right." Ivy's lips twitched. Not a smile, a flicker. "This is fine," she said. They nodded at each other like women in mourning. Maris reached forward, poured water into 1 glass. The sound broke the stillness. Ivy watched the motion carefully like it might mean something. "She didn't drink. I used to imagine this," Marisa said softly. "Every birthday, every April, I imagine what you might look like. What your voice would sound like if you'd hate me or be kind." Ivy said nothing. Maris hesitated, and I imagined what I would say. I had entire speeches in my head. She looked down at her hands. "I don't remember any of them." Ivy's voice was quiet. "I don't either." The words hung between them. "I took a DNA test." Ivy said, her tone even almost clinical. "I got the kit from that journalist Simon. It matched. He sent me a folder, pictures, newspaper scans, a photo of you." Maris blinked fast. "Did you believe it? I didn't want to." Maris nodded. Ivy stared at her hands. Her fingers flexed like they were searching for music. "I thought I was adopted," Ivy said. "Well, I was adopted. My dad, he didn't know. He thought it was legitimate. They told him I'd been abandoned. I asked him 2 nights ago. He broke down." Her voice didn't crack. It was almost too steady. "I'm sorry," Maris said. Ivy looked up. "For what?" The question struck like a bell. "For all of it," Maris whispered. "For the years. For the quiet. For not being there. For losing you." Ivy didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly. "I've been singing that lullaby since I was 10. She said I never knew where it came from. It just lived in me." Maris felt her body tense, tears pressing behind her ribs like an avalanche. "I made it up," she whispered. "In the hospital, I was holding you. You were crying. I just started humming. It didn't have a name." "I think it does, now," Ivy said. They looked at each other. Something moved across Ivy's face. Not peace, not anger, just something shifting. An interior door creaking open for the first time. "I don't know how to feel," Ivy said after a long pause. "You don't have to know," Maris said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "I didn't come for a relationship," Ivy added quickly. "I needed to know. That's all." Maris nodded. "That's enough." Silence again. Then so quietly it could have been mistaken for wind, Ivy said, "Do you remember holding me?" Maris closed her eyes. every second. She leaned back finally. Her spine ached with it. "You were quiet," Maris said. "You barely cried. But you gripped my fingers so tight I thought it would bruise." She smiled small and trembling. "I thought this one's going to hold on for everything." Ivy blinked. Her eyes glistened, but the tears didn't fall. They sat like that. Two strangers tethered by blood and memory stitched together by a song. Neither had known the other still carried. Maris shifted forward slightly. Would it be all right if I hummed it?" Ivy didn't speak. "She does not at once." Maris took a breath. The melody left her lips in pieces, halting, shaking. But it was the same. The same hush of sound, the same soft rise and fall like waves on a cradle. Ivy closed her eyes. Her throat jumped once, and when she opened her eyes again, a single tear had made its way down her cheek. Maris didn't stop humming. She kept going until the air between them was full of it. Ivy leaned back against the couch, head tilted toward the ceiling, and for a moment the beige walls disappeared. The room became soft with memory, and the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, like breath, held in the chest of something too sacred to name. And somewhere inside Ivy, the line between past and present trembled. Not broken, but beginning to blur. Waiting. Daniel Mercer stood at the edge of the hallway, just outside Evie's bedroom door, where a low song played from her laptop. Something quiet, mournful, finger-picked. Her voice rose through it now and then, drifting above the chords like smoke. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He stepped back into the dark of the living room and sat down in the old recliner he'd kept since before she was born, before he thought she was his. The silence in the house had changed. It wasn't peace anymore. It was the kind of silence that comes after a breach, after something precious breaks in two, and both pieces still tremble from split. He stared at a photograph on the side table. Ivy, age 7, toothy and wild-haired, her arms wrapped around his neck. He remembered that day. She found a baby rabbit in the yard and cried when it ran off. He made her cocoa and told her sometimes things don't stay, but that doesn't mean they weren't meant to be held, even just for a little while. He hadn't thought of that moment in years. Now it haunted him. Daniel rose, moved to the bookshelf, and pulled down the cedar box that had lived on the top shelf for over 2 decades. He'd never opened it in front of Ivy. Inside adoption papers, blank forms, a letter from a third-party liaison who had facilitated the transfer. At the time, it had seemed clean simple, a closed system, a private hospital, no questions. He and May, his late wife, had been aching for a child. When Ivy came into their arms, the ache had stopped. But now the edges of everything were fraying. He unfolded the yellowed letter, reading it again slowly. It never mentioned abandonment, only an arrangement, a transition of guardianship phrases, vague enough to be harmless and specific enough to sound legal. His hands curled at the corners of the page. There in small type, attending liaison, Irea Elena Rivera. He'd never noticed the name before. Or maybe he had and buried it under gratitude and denial. He stood in the middle of the room, the box open like a wound, the letter trembling in his grip. Later that night, he knocked gently on Evie's door. Her voice was soft. "Yeah." He opened it. She sat on the floor, her guitar beside her eyes, puffy. She looked up at him like she'd aged 10 years in the past 10 days. "I need to talk to you," he said. "It's about your adoption." She blinked once. "Okay." He sat across from her, sitting the letter down between them like evidence. "I told you, they said you were abandoned." That's not exactly true. Her body tensed, arms crossed low. What do you mean? I mean, the whole thing was too easy, he said, shame thick in his throat. We were desperate. Your mom and I, we've been turned down so many times. When this came along, we didn't ask enough questions. Her eyes sharpened. You didn't want to ask. He nodded slowly. There's a name here, he said. Elena Rivera. I think she was a nurse at the hospital. She might have been the person who handed you over. Ivy looked down at the letter, her lips pressed into a line. I want to find her, she said. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't offer comfort. Instead, he did something he hadn't done since she was small. He reached across the floor and held her hand. Not as a parent claiming something, but as a man relinquishing. I love you, he said. You are my daughter. That doesn't change. But it's not all of the truth, Ivy whispered. No, he admitted. It's not. The next morning, Ivy left before dawn. She took a train out of the city to a quiet suburb with overgrown hedges and retired neighbors who waved from porches with chipped mugs in their hands. Elena's address had been listed quietly in a comment thread Ivy tracked through one of Simon's articles. She stood in front of the house for 10 minutes before knocking. The door opened slowly. Elena looked older than in the news clippings, smaller like the years had peeled her down. Her eyes flicked to Evie's face and froze. I'm Ivy Rose. Ivy said, I think you knew me as something else. Elena's voice cracked before it left her throat. Lily Ivy nodded. Elena stepped back. One trembling hand pressed her chest. You have her eyes. I want answers, Ivy said gently, but without softness. I don't want apologies. I want the truth. Elena motioned her in. I don't have all of it, but I'll give you what I know. Inside, the house was filled with small relics, knitted blankets, quiet clocks, the smell of peppermint, and old pages. Elena sat with her like a ghost, returning to a place where breath still lingers. She spoke slowly. There was a woman. Blonde, sharp voice said she was family. Callie. She came into the ward the night before. She had a badge. I didn't check it. She shook her head. I stepped away. Not even a full minute. When I came back, you were gone. Your chart, too. I reported it, but the hospital covered it. They said it would destroy trust. They scrubbed the footage. I was reassigned. Did you help her? Ivy asked. No, Elena whispered, but I didn't stop her. That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table phone beside him. No call came, no message. He didn't expect one. He stared at the letter again. This time not as a father, but as a man who had been part of a fracture he could never completely repair. In the hallway, Ivy's room remained untouched. A quiet universe paused mid-spin, and outside, spring rain began to fall. Not furious, not heavy, just enough to remind the windows how to shiver. The tremor in his hands never stopped, but he no longer mistook it for weakness. It was the shape of truth finally entering the body. The air held a chill that didn't belong to the season. It was April, but the wind moved, like November sharp, searching, whispering through the trees, as if trying to stir what had long been buried. Maris Halloway stood at the edge of her sister's porch, hands in the pockets of her coat. The old wooden steps creaked on her weight. Light spilled from the living room window, casting shadows across the siding. Inside, she could hear the faint clink of dishes, a radio humming something from decades ago. She hadn't seen Callie in years, not since their father's funeral, not since the last bitter word had passed between them like a stone too sharp to carry and too heavy to throw. She knocked. Callie opened the door in her slippers, eyes narrowed, hair streaked silver, and pulled into a loose knot. She looked at Maris for a long, hollow moment, then stepped aside. You want tea? She asked. No, Callie nodded. Didn't think so. The house was smaller than Maris remembered, but warmer. Photographs hung along the hallway. Callie's kids now grown. A few grandkids, but no baby photos, none from a spring of 1994. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The wood was scarred with age. Ring for mug sat down without coasters. Maris stared at the scratches like a map of things they'd never said. You saw her, Callie said, not as a question. I did, Maris said. She's beautiful. She's quiet. She's haunted. Callie exhaled slowly, staring at her hands. I know what you did, Maris said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Callie blinked once. You think I took her? You did take her, Maris said, each word precise. Callie looked up. Her eyes were not angry. They were tired. I didn't steal her. She stopped, swallowed. I was desperate. Maris's voice cracked for the first time. She was a child, Callie. My child. I didn't know what was going to happen, Callie snapped. I thought I was helping. I thought I was saving you from yourself. Maris's mouth opened, but no sound came. Callie continued. You weren't okay. Not after the birth. Not after you left. You wouldn't eat. You wouldn't sleep. You were talking to shadows. Maris, you left the stove on 3 times in 1 week. I was grieving. Maris said you were breaking, Callie whispered. The silence stretched between them. Callie leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. There was a woman I met outside the clinic. She said she helped with adoptions. Said she could place the baby where she'd be safe. I thought it was legit. She had papers, a badge. Maris's breath caught. That was a lie. I know that now, Callie said. Who is she? Maris asked. I don't know, Callie said. She used a different name every time. She met me 3 times. Told me when to come, gave me a coat, told me to wear it into the hospital, said Elena would be on shift, and that everything would be prepared. Elena, Maris whispered. She didn't know the plan. Callie said quickly. She wasn't part of it. She left the nursery for 60 seconds. The woman was waiting by the stairwell. I passed the baby to her. I never saw her again. You gave her away, Maris said, voice hollow. I didn't know, Callie said. I didn't know she'd disappear. I thought it was going to be okay. I thought she'd get placed into a real family, that you'd recover, that one day I could bring her back. Maris shook her head. Her hands trembled in her lap. You had no right. I know, Callie said, and for the first time her voice cracked. The silence returned sharp this time. I saw her. Maris said again, quieter now. She looks like our mother. Callie nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. She doesn't know me. She shouldn't. I agree. Maris looked at her sister. Not as a sibling, not as a traitor, but as a woman who had made a ruinous decision inside of loneliness. And maybe that made it worse. Callie reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table. What is it? Maris asked. A name from the papers the woman gave me. I kept 1 page. I never told anyone. Maris opened it. Inside, a name typed in fading ink. Grace Delroy, pediatric nurse. She might have known more than she said, Callie whispered. I remember the way she looked at me like she knew something wasn't right. Maris nodded slowly. Simon's mother. Who doesn't matter? They sat in silence until the wind picked up outside and rustled the gutters. Somewhere in the house, a door shifted slightly on its hinge. When Maris stood to leave, she didn't say goodbye. Neither did Callie. As she stepped outside, the wind caught the edge of her coat, lifting it like a sail. She paused on the steps, looked up. The moon was high, full, sharp-edged, casting a pale glow over the sidewalk. It reminded her of that night. She remembered staring out the hospital window, the nursery full of shadows, the moonlight falling across the empty bassinet like frost. What had the moon seen? A woman in a pale coat, a nurse with shaking hands, a baby wrapped in a blanket that never made it home. The moon had been there for all of it, but it had never spoken. Maris pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and walked into the dark. Each step like a closing chapter, each breath a quiet act of defiance. And in a house 2 blocks away, Ivy sat at her desk, fingers resting on the keyboard. The lullaby waited in her throat, but she didn't sing yet. She was writing instead, not to be heard. To remember, the video was quiet at first. No intro, no editing, no announcement, just Ivy seated in front of her window. A gentle wash of late afternoon light stretching across her cheekbones. Her guitar rested against her knees, and her fingers hovered above the strings, not playing yet, just listening. Outside, the trees moved like breath. She looked different. Not her face, not really, but in the way she sat rooted. Not still, but steadied. Something in her posture had shifted, as if her bones were beginning to remember where they belonged. She took a soft breath and began. The first note of the lullaby was almost too quiet to hear. She didn't force it. She let it rise like fog over morning fields, slow, inevitable, and whole. Her voice had changed deeper now, fuller shaped by something truer than memory. The comments appeared within minutes. Strangers and friends, a few who'd followed her journey in silence, waiting for her to name it. But the first comment pinned to the top was her own. "I'm home now." She closed the laptop after she posted it. She didn't need to watch the views rise. That part no longer mattered. Downstairs, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee untouched in front of him. He didn't say much anymore, not out of guilt, not out of shame, but because words had grown smaller than what they were both trying to carry. She joined him without speaking, sitting across from him, folding her leg beneath her, like she used to as a child. "I saw the video," he said finally. She nodded. He cleared his throat. Do you want me to meet her? The woman, who your mother?" "I don't know yet," Ivy said. "Maybe. That's okay." They sat in silence for a while. The good kind. The kind that doesn't stretch, just holds. He reached across the table and touched her hand, not asking, just reminding. After he left for work, Ivy walked to the park down the street. The air was crisp early spring, settling into the trees, blossoms barely beginning to open. She passed a mother, holding a toddler's hand, guiding him along the path. The child laughed, pointing at a squirrel. Ivy smiled and kept walking. Near the bench by the pond, she found Simon waiting. He stood when he saw her hands tucked in his coat pockets, his camera slung over one shoulder, but not raised. He hadn't come to document. "Hey," he said gently. She sat beside him. "It's weird," she said. "I thought finding out would answer everything." "And did it know?" she said. "But it made the questions real. And I think that matters more." Simon nodded. "She wants to see you again." "I know," Ivy said. "I will." They watched the ducks move across the water in slow arcs. The breeze picked up and scattered cherry blossoms across the path like confetti, too gentle to celebrate anything loudly. "She told me what she named me," Ivy said. Simon turned. "Lily," she whispered. He waited. "I don't know if I'm Lily or just me, or both. Maybe you're becoming both," he offered. She smiled faintly. Maybe later that day, Ivy stood outside Maris's home. The house was small, worn-wrapped in overgrown ivy that curled around the porch railing as if trying to pull the whole thing into the earth. The door opened before she knocked. Maris stood there in a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back, her eyes gentler than before. Not less tired, but more open. "I didn't know if you'd come," she said. "I didn't know either," Ivy replied. They stood in the doorway, the spring wind brushing past them like an invitation. "I have something for you," Maris said, stepping aside. Inside, the nursery had changed. The crib was gone. In its place, a simple wooden chair, a stack of books, a potted plant that leaned toward the light, but the mobile still hung. Pale stars turning slowly above nothing. Maris led her to a small bookshelf. She pulled out a photo album wrapped in linen. "These are yours. All the pieces I kept." Ivy opened it slowly. Hospital bracelets, a lock of hair, a copy of her birth certificate with her original name, a photo of Maris 28 years younger, holding a tiny infant whose face mirrored Ivy's in quiet ways. She touched the image. "Thank you," she whispered. Maris wiped her eyes. "Can I ask you something?" Ivy looked up. "Will you say it with me just once?" The words didn't feel strange. They felt like breath. They sat together in the small room, knees touching. Maris hummed the first note, her voice faint but steady. Ivy followed, letting her voice rest against her mother's, like a harmony years late, but perfectly timed. The lullaby filled the space, trembling through the walls, curling around the corners, like light finding its way through closed shutters. Neither of them cried. They didn't need to. They finished in silence, hence clasped now, not tentative, just there. That night, Ivy returned home and opened her window to the dark. The sky was clear, the stars sharp. She leaned her elbows on the sill chin and hand and listened to the quiet. Not the hollow kind, the kind that means something's begun. A small notification appeared on her screen. New comment, Starfall Luna. She clicked. Just one sentence. "Welcome back, Lily." She read it once, then again, then smiled. And outside, in a world wider and warmer than it had been a month ago, the stars turned overhead, not as witnesses this time, but as companions. Not everything healed. Not everything made sense. But the music had returned, and it was